4 countries and 10 cities in South and Southeast Asia. And you can see from the map that there's quite a sort of a diversity of geographies, obviously a diversity of governance environments, looking at India, Thailand, Vietnam and Indonesia. And while the issues of climate change impact or climate change risk and a diversity of geographies and governance environments was important, the most important thing was actually in selecting these cities was their willingness to participate, their willingness to engage in this program, to start thinking about climate change adaptation from an urban perspective. And for some of the cities that we're working with, this was old news. I mean, dealing with climate risk is something they've been doing for a long time. For others, thinking about it in this way, thinking about it as a climate issue rather than just a disaster risk reduction issue or an issue of urban poverty was something new, and trying to sort of shift perspective, but certainly getting that political buy-in was crucial to the way in which we selected cities. So I did have 10 minutes, now I have a little bit more, so I might be a little bit more expansive. But the tools and approaches, I think the most important one that we've been working on and building is the framework with which we're engaging with cities within ACERN. And this is very simplistic, and we almost make no apologies for that. But this principle, or this approach of sort of the 3 circles, as we like to call it. And this is really just to highlight that one of the issues is climate change and the kind of shocks and stresses that the cities are facing. We're not pretending that we can predict or project exactly what's going to happen, but we understand that the uncertainties that climate change are going to bring in terms of rainfall and temperature are crucial to how we're approaching the challenges that cities are facing. And certainly in the case of existing weather patterns, changing weather patterns and climate-related risks that the cities are facing. The second one is vulnerability. Obviously, the way in which, who is the most vulnerable is the question. So looking at areas of vulnerability of both locations, but also socioeconomic divisions, different kinds of people, different kinds of areas, and vulnerable to different kinds of risks, and understanding that not necessarily in the context of climate change, but understanding who is actually has limited access to water, has limited voice, has limited infrastructure deficits, that kind of thing. And then the third part is this urban systems concept, which really comes from an understanding of approaching from a resilience perspective, so looking at a systems basis rather than taking a sectoral approach or any other kind of sort of valid approach that cities could take, but thinking about the way in which the urban systems operate. And this, to explain a little more, we've phrased this in terms of an urban system being a city having the focus on sort of well-being, providing economic benefits for its people. That's the reason people are attracted to cities. But the way in which that well-being is created, being a function of the ecosystems that facilitate that, the institutions, governance, the infrastructure, obviously, but also the knowledge. And the sort of understanding of urban systems is we need to think about not just the infrastructure, we need to think about all those different components of the urban system, and the way in which they interact with climate change and the way in which they interact with vulnerability. The approach and the sort of central part of the Venn diagram beautifully sort of suggests this sort of sweet spot where resilience planning can occur, where we're thinking about vulnerability in urban systems and climate change impacts, and we can start to think about resilience in this context. The process or the sort of framework doesn't suggest that once you understand these 3 things once, then you can go ahead and resilience plan, of course. There's uncertainty inherent in all 3 of these elements, and by definition there's therefore uncertainty in how you plan or act or organise around your resilience planning for the central part. But it's certainly, it's helped us to think about the different components, and also to, in reflection, to think about where we could then go back to where we need to improve our understanding of those different elements, or as new information becomes available, we can feed it into each of those elements. The actual process, which I think we go right back to the beginning, Darren's first slide was from Marcus Munch, from ISET, and ISET are responsible for facilitating this process in each of the 10 cities, or working with local partners. And this, I'm sure this graphic is familiar to those of you who've studied adaptive management in the past. Basically, you've got a process to increase learning, and you've got over time a series of ways of interacting. The way in which the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network process has emerged, if we look at these sort of first circles, the idea is to bring together a range of different actors in the urban space. So government, of course, but also NGOs, community-based organisations, academic institutions who are all engaging in this space. Or even if they're not, bring them into the conversation, and to feed in particular studies which are done by those institutions or by external institutions. So initially looking at household vulnerability or climate change risk, and looking at ways in which you can pilot or test some of the issues that are emerging. Go away, think about it in the context of your particular government sector, in terms of your community, in terms of your area of activity, and then come back with more information, with more opportunity to discuss and raise issues. And so this sort of process is not, obviously doesn't end with 3 engagements, but this was the basis of the way in which the process has kind of emerged. So wanting to bring together all the different actors in the urban space, but also feed in particular studies, particular detailed data into those discussions. And I mean, some of the examples of some really sort of exciting examples have happened in places like Vietnam, where previously the conversation between government and the NGOs has been very sort of one way, and this environment has enabled NGOs to start influencing, if not decisions, certainly agendas and what's actually on the table. And so in a little bit more sort of detail, there's certainly this need to undertake vulnerability analyses and sector studies. So what are the most vulnerable areas? Is it health? Is it transport? Is it coastal resources? And actually do some more detailed sort of study using local institutions, guided by expertise, whether global or local. And then developing with the sort of, I hate to say endpoint, but working towards a resilience strategy. So trying to understand all these different elements in the city and bring them together in a kind of forward-looking way. And I'd love to go into all the different elements of what led to the resilience strategy, but we can maybe talk about those another time. But certainly trying to not introduce a new type of plan into an existing institutional environment, but a strategy which sort of identifies some of the actions that need to be taken, some of the key risks and vulnerabilities that exist, and how you can begin to act, some of the sort of projects or opportunities there are. And this is both directed at funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, but also to other donor environments, other donor funding programs. It's not to sort of set cities up to say, we know what we need to do next. We may not have the funds, we may not have the capacities, but we understand what we need to do. And so there's this idea of intervention projects to begin building those capacities, but begin identifying or addressing deficits, whether that's infrastructure or capacity. And so there's some lessons which are linked to projects, and certainly the first one, which the lessons may seem fairly self-evident, I guess, but the key issue, and I guess it's come up again and again, was that cities are making decisions every day which may be reducing vulnerability, they may be contributing to vulnerability, but the basis for which they make those decisions need to be based on data, they need to be based on interaction with a range of decision makers and points of view. So this resilience strategy is not the document which you then refer to as a type of Bible, but it's a way of bringing together some of that interaction, some of those some of those directions. So